Hi, Tanita. Welcome to the sisterhood.
I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we are so glad to have you. And Tanita, we happen to live in the same area, which is so fun. So I get to know you in real life, which is always a bonus. But why don't you tell everyone a little bit about where you are, what you do, and how you spend your days?
That's perfect. While I am an Arizona native, my whole family is, my husband, my both my kids, born and raised in Arizona. We moved to Spokane, Washington 2 years ago, just a month before the pandemic. So really great timing because I serve with Young Life and I got to take a different position with Young Life. I moved from an longtime area director to an associate regional director, which means I now get to work with a bunch of area directors and help support ministry to middle school students, high school students, kids with disabilities, college kids, teen moms, kids in the system throughout central and eastern Washington and North Idaho. And I'm really excited because I have two little boys. So I'm super excited to be here talking today because my days are spent chasing my 4 and 6-year-old boys. So it's laundry, it's work, it's reading their level of books, my level of books, it's coaching adults, it's making dinner, it's all of the things.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about your work and your life is that you are constantly interfacing with Generation Z. And that is who we're talking about today. And as we're looking at this, we're parenting boys, we're talking about parenting boys. I think it's really important to put them in context too. And what's great about this conversation, it's going to apply to all the girls out there as well. But I think it's interesting to put boys in context of the generation in which they're being raised. So how did you start to dive into this topic and where did you go with it?
I have been a Young Life leader working with middle school kids and high school kids since 1998. And about 2015, 2016, things were starting to feel a little bit different in my high school club. And I couldn't put my finger on it, but I watched it the next couple of years where messages I was giving wasn't hitting the same way. I was getting a lot of calls from parents about kids who were struggling with anxiety. I was seeing panic attacks at our club gatherings and at camp. I would text a group of girls like, hey, let's go get breakfast. And they would all respond back individually about not wanting to go with the group. I'll go with you, but I won't go with the group. And I just felt like somehow like I was slipping, like, oh, maybe I've crossed over into that land of I'm too old to work with teenagers anymore. But at the same time, I was working on my doctorate and took a course called, Preaching Christ to a Post-Everything World. And that thing, post-everything, really started to give some context to what was going on. And as I started to read and a couple books, people recommended to me, I realized what had happened was it wasn't that I was slipping, is that we had a generation show up and that we were playing catch up all of a sudden. And it was very, very fast. They changed the culture of adolescence very quickly. And it just happened to be that I was working with high school students when it happened. And so that was it. I was in to study Gen Z after that.
Yeah. So then you went on and actually specialized, so to speak, in this generation. And I know that parents are really curious in this conversation to know what is it about them what are some benchmarks that make them different than past generations? And why are they a little bit of a conundrum?
So this is the largest generation in the history of the United States. And they're also the most diverse. So more than half is non-white, which has never happened in the history of our country before. The big marker for them is they're what's called digital natives. So for millennials, their marker was that they had access to the internet, and that was a brand new thing for them. This group had access to smartphone technology, interactive technology from a very, very young age. So I mean, if I could hand my phone to your average 5-year-old, right, they can zoom, they already know how to swipe and scroll and zoom. And so they are very comfortable with that technology and they're native to that technology. So there are a lot of psychologists that would even say this group of kids, that this Gen Z, their first language is a digital language. They exist more in that space. Whereas for older generations, that might be our third or fourth or fifth down the line, we're speaking a different language when we're interacting with technology through them. But for them, they're very comfortable in interpersonal relationships and through a technological lens. So that is the biggest marker for them. I also like to remind folks that as someone who grew up in the 90s, class of 97, they're coming of age during a time where social media is alive and well. And that by itself comes with a long list of impacts on kids and how they're thinking and how they're viewing culture and different things. They're coming of age during a global pandemic, which didn't exist when we were in high school. And they're coming of age when school shootings they're visible, they're happening, they have lockdown drills. That did not exist when I was a high school student. So those are three big things that, three of the things, right? But those are three big things that exist now for teenagers that did not exist for their parents. So we have to understand that that's a big level of what is impacting their experience. And then this group, while I had TV growing up, it wasn't cable, it was the clicky channels. Then we moved to cable. Now we have streaming services, which means marketing is everywhere. Marketing is not just on the 5, broadcast channels. It is all over cable, it's all over the internet, it's all over social media. And so this group is being actively targeted, manipulated, and exploited from a very, very young age by people who are trying to sell to them. And there's created this dynamic that we call hyper personalization, meaning your technology, we know this, my technology saw what I bought on Amazon or at Target, and then it feeds you more of what you like. So the same thing happens with the social media, things happen with things they're looking at. So what they're being fed constantly is what you like, you just want more of. And so their actual exposure to wider ranges of opinions and ideas and products is being limited by their technology too.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh.
It's a lot of things.
Yeah, it really is a lot of things. And you're right. Just last week I was doing some leadership training at a John Maxwell conference. So I was actually saying John Maxwell's name. Pretty soon, my phone, every single thing that was on there was about leadership and John Maxwell. And I'm like, it feels so invasive. It feels so strange that your phone is listening to you. And yet for these kids, they're not even thinking about it. Like, to me, it still feels odd, but I think, for these digital natives, this is just the way of the world. And when the kids say, Mom and Dad, you don't understand, it's not the same as when you were growing up. I think that what I hear you saying is that is true. It is not the same, and we can't expect it to be the same, or for them to respond in the same ways. Would you agree with that?
I 100% agree. And one example, when I talk to folks and parents in older generations, they'll say, let's just talk about noise as one aspect of it, and think about, at the end of the day, there was a time, right? We had one landline in our house. That was the only way people got a hold of you. There was a time where the phone stopped ringing because if your friends called, your parents were going to yell at them for calling after a certain time. So there was actual silence. There was a time when we were not reachable by people. So, we did things like, go to sleep, or people saw each other face to face. But there was a time where there was quiet. We could feel all of our feelings. We could think of all of our thoughts. We went to sleep with quiet. Some people had radios and TVs in their room, but it would be very minimal, not super common. And in that, it's not interactive. It's just kind of this white noise in the background. And the same thing when you woke up. We woke up to quiet. We didn't wake up to 50 notifications on our phone of things we missed just because we were asleep. All these things that you go, those were your teacher can't reach you after you leave school. All these places where we actually had space to feel and to breathe and to do things. They're actual, people think that kids are busier today, that this generation is busier, but the research actually says that they have 30 minutes more free time than a Gen Xer did growing up. It's just that because of that digital interaction, they're not completing loops of action. So they'll start homework and start a problem, then get distracted by something on the phone, then they're doing that. Then they've got to come back and re-engage with their homework, whatever they're thinking about. It could be doing their makeup, it could just be completing a simple task, but their brain isn't closing that loop on very quick basis. So I talked to a counselor, said it's like they're always opening computer tabs and never shutting them. So they're always open. And that space and silence help us with that.
Yeah. And that's exhausting when it comes to the brain, which I've been reading about that too, just neuroscientifically, what happens when your brain is never really shutting off. Because they think, you think about when a teenager wants to kind of chill out and rest, right? They say chill out. They'll go to the couch. I mean, every parent can picture this. They go to the couch, they lay down, and what do? They pick up their phone. But the problem is that when neuroscientists put them under, like, they actually put, probes on their brains and they study what happens when they're scrolling, it's almost getting them elevated to an almost not quite to a trauma like state, but it's up there. And so they think they're resting, but they're not.
Right.
They're actually, their brain waves are acting as such that they're like, and that's hence the anxiety, right? So anyway, okay. But I do want to start with, what are the strengths of this generation? Because I think sometimes we, especially as parents, we can feel a little bit heavy about what's happening with this generation, but they do have some strengths. And so I think it's even a positive thing for us to start there. So what are those?
One thing is they're so resourceful. They know that they can find the answer like on YouTube or the internet. And so even if there was a time where I was going, I wanted to cut fresh pineapple and I had never done that before. And I was telling a high school kid and they're like, why don't you just YouTube it? And I was like, oh my goodness. They learn how to do so many crazy things on YouTube. They have a very highly adapted mental filter for information. Because if you think about how much information they take in per day, just even with their interaction with technology, they have become very fast at figuring out, what am I interested, what I want to read. And they very much understand when they're being lied to and how they're being lied to, because they've been marketed to for such a young age. Digital language is their first language. They know all the flaws in it. I have never seen a generation that is so highly self-aware. So even in that situation, you said they're sitting on the couch and they're scrolling and they think they're relaxing. But if we stopped and asked them and said, do you feel relaxed right now? Do you think this is helping your mental health? They would be able to identify like really clearly, no, in fact, I'm more stressed out. I have more anxiety. I feel worse about myself, but I can't stop. So they can verbalize all those things that I was never able to verbalize as a teenager. And I think a couple of things that they bring that are really beautiful globally is they do care for the dignity of all people. And they very much are looking to make sure that people are not being overlooked, that certain populations are not being overlooked, as well as they see what's happening on Earth, and they care for the Earth. They care for creation. They care for nature. And those are things that are really special about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think as we are looking at, how do we really play into their strengths? I think those are some really great ways that we can do that, and that we can get creative about how to care about what they care about, and ask them that, what they notice, and really utilize that. Like, okay, they really care about that. So how can I kind of come alongside as a parent and even help them in their creativity in those ways? So I appreciate that a lot. What kind of going there first, and having that in our minds, but then also realizing that there's some real challenges with Gen Z. And would you say, some of those really kind of bullet point top challenges that across the board, parents, teachers, I mean, anyone who's coaches or working with Gen Z, what are they seeing?
Well, one of the things that's underlying the surface that not a lot of people talk about is that this generation has been given a personalization of truth. So there's no absolute truth that exists. Truth is whatever you want it to be. Truth is what you make it. Truth is what you decide. And when we do that, we're not giving kids an anchor point, or generation of people actually, an anchor point to make decisions. So when they have a conflict in core values, like for example, I care about the dignity, or at least the tolerance and acceptance of all people, but I also care about justice. Someone along the line has to say, well, in order to have justice, you have to decide something's right or wrong, which does mean the rejection of certain values or people. So, right, like we're watching war happen. People are taking sides. Well, are they taking sides? I think it's one side, really. But like what we're saying is going, okay, so, but someone, if there's no truth, then you could say, well, I guess, people are just living their own truth, man. And that means for them, that means hurting other people and taking power. And that's just their truth. They can live in that. But you also have to say their justice side go, no, that's not right. You don't hurt other people. But there's no guideline principle of how do you decide that on there. So if you're running around coming of age, going through adolescence, and have no anchor point to decide who you're supposed to be or what is right or wrong, that by itself is going to cause anxiety. And then what they're doing is relying on cancel culture, real time in like reaction of the culture to things on Twitter or Instagram to make those decisions. And so that's just really by itself going to create a little bit of hardship for this generation, which all the way, yes, we have a giant mental health wave. It was predicted by Dr. Jean Twenge about 6 years ago. She's a psychologist in generational studies. She said, this is coming and we're not ready for it. And it's here and we're not ready for it. So we have high levels of loneliness, anxiety, depression, coming from lots of things. And so a lot of people ask me, why are they so anxious? I'm like, oh, look, it's not one reason, it's like 80 reasons. So, there's a whole bunch of things that are going underneath the surface on that. And so those two things really are challenging for this group of kids, this generation coming up.
So I'm just curious, what made her go out on and say this is coming? I mean, was it the digital input? What were some of those factors that she could see it coming a mile away that maybe the rest of us couldn't?
Well, so there has been sites like they were studying the trends of depressive episodes, loneliness, suicidal ideations that were happening in adolescence. And what happened is it stayed pretty level from about 2003 to 2012. And in 2012, it starts to really climb up. It really begins to just shoot up. And what happened is they line that up with it. That trend follows the trend of access to smartphones and social media in the hands of adolescents. And so she at 2016 was looking back 4 years and seeing it come up like this. And it was like, this is not going to get better. This is going to keep going. And as like I said, she studies psychology and she studies generations. And so this was just a shift that she saw come in our direction. And I think we all see it's here.
It's here. I mean, truly, just in this past 2 weeks, I cannot tell you the number of situations that I have been either a part of or privy to where because of anxiety or depression or anxiety and depression, there have been kids who are suffering in some way. And whether that's that they just are completely removed from a friend group, or they are dropping out of school, or they are, isolating or unable to do just normal life because of it, it is becoming debilitating. And I think I don't really know anyone who's not impacted. I think everyone at this point is impacted. And it does seem that girls are especially impacted, which is interesting because, boys are too, completely. But I'm also seeing in the research that there's a little bit of even an uptick with girls. So as we're talking about boys in particular, how do you see this playing out in young men, especially as you're working with Young Life and kind of seeing things up really close? How are you seeing that particularly in boys?
I think boys are in a complicated place because as we're in a constant conversation culture in this generation, more specifically with gender identity, what makes you a boy, what makes you a girl, what makes you neither of those things or both of those things, like these, they're very hard for kids to get their mind around. And there's this value that's also very high for Gen Z. One of the top questions, some psychologists say the top question that this generation is asking at all times is it safe or am I safe? There's a very high value of safety that has been brought up with this group of kids. Some of the conversation has started to move from safety to resilience because some of the unintended consequences of constantly breathing safety onto kids or protecting them all the time. And I had a college student send this to me. They said, it sounds like we got the message that we're not trustworthy. So just protect us from everything because you cannot trust us to navigate these decisions. I like to say, like, we've accidentally told a generation that they're not tough enough, smart enough, wise enough, or have enough creative problem solving to make it through hard things. So we better just protect them from everything. So when they're saying, is it safe? They're not saying, is it safe? Because if it's not, I'll prepare and I'll get ready and I'll get the right tools and then I'll go. What they're saying is it safe? If it's not, then I'm not doing it at all. So that really makes it very risk averse. Fear of failure, massive, 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 all these things. So when we look at the way we're even looking at our sons, we're just going, where can we let them fail? Where can we let them get hurt in measured places, right? Can we let them work out their differences as brothers outside by themselves? We're watching through the window rather than stand outside and navigate all of their conflict for them. So we're kind of trying to learn, going, okay, if we overcompensated on safety and everything, how do we then say, well, we actually can't protect them for everything. So how do we gear them up to know that they will be okay when they hit the hard stuff? They will be okay and they will be resilient. And that's part of what we are learning with this. We have relationships and friendships are being done very differently by this generation. And particularly for boys, there's a high percentage of boys that engage in gaming on a regular basis. And I think one of the misunderstandings we have is we have parents who are like, oh my goodness, they're addicted to their video games. And what we're learning is that no, there's a sense of community. This is where they're talking to other kids, not just in their neighborhood, around the world. I bet there's a number of folks who are listening here who have sons who are gaming and meeting kids around the world. And I've asked some of our boys, and I'm like, what do you guys talk about? Do you talk about life? Like, no, we're just playing. We're just like, it's like playing in a playground, but as adolescents through a screen on an earphone with others around the world. And so that brings a whole other thing of going, how do I help my kid navigate that? Identify when they're in trouble, identify how to move through or past those things. How do I help them identify who's a good friend and who's not a good friend in a space that I never existed?
Yeah, exactly. Which is why it's hard. One of the things that I've heard is they can have a hard time differentiating between fantasy and reality because they often, because of the digital world, are in fantasy so much of the time. Do you have any insight into even that? It kind of hits on what you're saying, like what is a real friend, what's not a real friend.
I think they live in constant places where things don't totally match up together. So in other words, like they know they're being lied to on social media, but then they also believe social media in some places, right? They know, just like I know that eating brownies at 10 o'clock at night is not good for me, but I will do it anyway because I think I'm past that consequence. So there's lots of those places where because so much of their world is digital, it can be very difficult to figure out what's real and what's not real. But that's, I would say, I haven't read those studies, but it makes a ton of sense of trying to navigate what is real life and what is truth. What is truth is another big, big question this generation is asking all the time because of those dynamics you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I am seeing just this sense of their first go-to is always digital. So for example, with even my own children, like they'll say something and I'll say, well, pick up the phone and call. If you talk to a real person, then you're going to get a lot further and you're going to get a real answer. And they're always looking at me like, oh, that's interesting idea. That's an interesting idea. Whereas for us, that was what we did. You called on the phone. For them, their first response is always digital. I'll send an email, I'll send a text, I'll send a DM. And so it's just so interesting how that human to human interaction, and I see it in teenagers, and I know that you do too with Young Life. I see teenagers surrounded but lonely all the time, that if they don't, like we used to, for example, when I was growing up, and you can probably relate to this, after all the games, we would go and hang out at like McDonald's, at a certain McDonald's, and we'd be there all night because there was no other way to be in touch with people. Well, now they have all this digital connection. And so they all go home and they're all connected on their devices, but they're not connected in real life, for example. So talk to me a little bit about kind of how that dynamic is playing, how you see that dynamic playing out, and how we can encourage kids to be more in person.
So this is where we understand that every generation has its own culture, which means every generation has its own values and ideas and taboos and mores. What's interesting is when we encourage a Gen Zer to interact with a conflict in person, we're actually breaking one of their generational values, which is like, if I was to call you in person, it means something probably is wrong, versus I'm just calling to say hi. So, or that they'll FaceTime, which I actually think is pretty amazing, that they'll do a face-to-face conversation like this versus then on the phone like this. My kids are Gen Alpha, those are right, the generation coming after Z. So watching what I'm seeing with our Gen Zers, even we have a landline now at our house that you're like, you can use the phone and call somebody. That's how you will talk to someone. Or we have a rule in our house, like, I don't have any devices for them. So and the kids know that. Why don't we have them? Like, because we play with people in person, not on screens. I'm like, that's right. So when we're asking kids to engage in person and face to face, it's about the same comfort level as if I said to a parent, can you do a TikTok? So it's going to be some discomfort. So we just have to recognize and understand that there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that we're asking them to speak a different language, and we have to understand that. So instead of going, it's not a big deal, just call them, because it's not a big deal for us. But if they said it's not a big deal, just do a TikTok. Well, because it's not a big deal for them. But we're actually breaking down a social kind of place that they lived in. You communicate digitally in person or digitally first all the time. In person's like third down the line, for them. And I think some of it goes back to that safety piece. It's way safer for me to not have to look at your face and say these things or talk to you, and have real time in person, possible rejection, possibly being misunderstood. Even though if you ask him, do you think you communicate better on your text? Do you think you guys deal with stuff better? They'll say, no, it's worse. It's 100% worse. So they know it, but we haven't really necessarily allowed them space to practice those skills on a regular basis. So and kids do understand things like, if you go outside and go for a walk with someone, do you think that's better for your mental health? Like, yes, I do. Do you think it's better for your relationship? Yes, I do. So part of it is helping them process, like, not because I think it's a good thing for you to do, but do you think it's a good thing for you to do? How is this helpful for you? Your mental health, your physical health, your interrelational health. How does this help you navigate and engage your cultural values and express them in a healthy way? And so it's much more like as if you're translating to a second language speaker, a second language, someone who's orienting culture. It's just funny because they live in the same house as we do. So it doesn't feel like we should be able to have to do those things.
That's a really good point. And I really like how you flip that. Instead, it would be like your kids asking you to do the TikTok. Because most parents would be like, no, I'm totally not doing that. So I really like that you flip that for parents or for bosses or whoever is interacting with them. I think that's helpful. I know you work in Young Life, and Young Life really specializes in that, person to person, just gathering activities. So if there's someone who's listening who has a Gen Zer son who is really struggling to engage in person, what encouragement would you give? And maybe what are some suggestions you would have?
Well, that's such a good and big question, because I think we're dealing with this on a lot of levels. It's more specifically since the pandemic. There was a study that was done by Barna that in the middle, so 2001, in the middle of the pandemic, that was restudying Gen Z. And the number one negative word that Gen Zers were using to describe how they feel was tired. A year before, it was anxious. A year later, it moved to tired. As you know, it's very hard to move tired people. And they're not talking about physically tired, though they are getting less sleep than previous generations, but they're overall exhausted. And we relate to that. We also understand what's the best remedy for being tired? Getting up and moving, which is very counterintuitive. And I process this with some high school students. I'm like, so tell me, let me get this straight. The research says you're tired. Do you relate with that? Yes. Like, the best way to help you not be tired is to get up and do something, like go for a walk. Like, yes. Like, how am I supposed to get you to do that? If you're tired, you're going to say no to me. They're like, yeah, that's really tough for you. Oh my gosh.
Uh-huh.
So I think they're talking about building resilience in a lot of different like little ways, and we can build those building blocks. Kids are all over the place, right? There's another friend who's studying anxiety and resilience, and is like, the funny thing is that for a lot of people, for different situations, doing the thing that makes you anxious actually reduces anxiety. Now, can I just recognize we have a very big like spectrum of anxiety, so this isn't one size fits all at all. Like everyone's all over the place. Recognize that. But what I'm realizing is we're having to help kids fail, mess up, or put themselves in risky situations where they may not succeed, or they may experience like some embarrassment, and then go, okay, how do I help you navigate these things so that you're not afraid of doing things in the future? And so these like being in person stuff, that's all over the place, because some kids are like, well, I don't want to go if I'm the only one. Some kids are like, I'll only go if I'm the only one. And then I have to navigate with people, be there with people. Do we need to give times? Like, can you do 5 minutes? 5 minutes, and we're going to consider that a win today. 10 minutes, and we'll consider that a win today. So some of it's finding where their comfort zone is, and where's the lack of comfort enter, and how do we kind of incrementally move into those places. What they need to hear from us consistently is they are courageous, and they are strong, and they are resilient. And this is why I get a little weepy, because when I ask our Gen Zers, what do you hear about yourself from the media, the larger media, or older generations? Just tell me what you hear about yourself. How do you hear your generation described? And I have never once, and I've done this in multiple situations with numbers of people, never had one positive word come out of their mouths.
Wow.
So the overwhelming message they're getting from larger societies, so I said the media, right, is that they are weak, that they are oversensitive, that they're snowflakes, that they're over emotional, that they're selfish. And I think about like, if it's our job just as adults to raise up the next generation, we can't be surprised when they live into the words that we speak over them. Instead of recognizing all the things they're holding, they're actually incredibly courageous. They just make it look easy because it's normal for them. But if I went back and dealt with the things they were dealing with as a 15-year-old, I would probably be crumbling also. So I think they're incredibly courageous. I think they're incredibly strong. They are more positioned to change the world because they're globally connected with one another. So they can contact someone from China and India and Africa. They can, because it's right in their hands. They can do these amazing things. So we have to start really speaking those truths of who they are to them, instead of telling them they're weak and fragile and then being surprised that they don't want to go somewhere or try something for the first time.
So good. That is really, really important what you just said. Thank you for that. Okay, so I do want to touch on faith, because we know the statistics and they're terrifying all of us, that kids are leaving the faith. They just are, in droves, in this generation. And you're in a space where you're trying to help them meet Jesus. And so talk to us a little bit about how you're doing that uniquely with this generation, and what we can do to not turn them off to faith. Because what I see happening and what I'm hearing is that the things that parents are doing, or church leaders are doing, youth pastors, are actually turning kids off to faith. What are they doing that's turning them off to faith? And how are you doing it differently, even in your sphere, that's allowing them to open up?
Yeah, so part of it is we've had a cultural shift at the same time. So many researchers, so Pew Research and Barna, as well as non-faith-based researchers, have come up and really just said, hey, do you know how Gen Z views Christians? They view them as irrelevant, hypocritical, judgmental, intolerant, harmful. And really the most shocking thing, and I think this came out of Barna, was they see no positive difference between believers and non-believers. So when that's your culture, like that's a giant stereotype, right? Let's understand that every time we're talking about generational study, that those are broad brushstrokes. There's nuances and different experiences in different places, but this is overall the overarching impression. So we have to start there and going, remember, this is the lens that this generation is growing up and viewing the church through. And part of it is they're asking different questions, or at least the questions they're asking have different context than their older generations. And so when I started Young Life, it was really, here's what they need to know about Jesus. Now go and tell them in their language. What I realized now is that I can do that and miss the questions that they're asking, and answer ones they're not. So what we've moved toward is, okay, what are kids asking, and how do I answer that with the gospel? And that takes away their relevancy, because now I'm addressing what's happening in their life. I can admit to things up front of like, we would talk about authenticity, right? We all think we're being authentic, but the problem is if we're not being authentic to the values that they carry, that they're asking, then it's not like, then they think we're not being authentic. So you think I'm judgmental and hypocritical? Oh my gosh, I am. Actually, that's why I need Jesus, because I am. So yes, and so will you go on this journey with me to understanding what Jesus can do for me, because I am those things. So we're really turning the lens and going, the gospel has been good news to all people everywhere around the globe throughout history. And so they just had different things that they were dealing with. I think we stopped thinking about this next generation of kids as a plug and play from what we've been doing for the last 30, 40 years. And we start going, no, what if I was doing a countercultural class? How would I deal with that? We watch Paul do that. Paul speaks very differently in Galatians and very differently in Ephesians than he does when he's in Athens. He takes a totally different method because it's a different audience, and he's moving towards them. So we're listening to them. We have to do way, way, way more listening. And here's what I want to say for parents and for those who are working with kids. Sometimes we think we're listening, like I'm listening, they're not saying anything. They're speaking in a different way than we've ever been used to. And so listening actually does look different. I'll give you an example. One is kids use memes a ton to express how they're feeling. So they'll post something. And if you look at that meme might be making very light humor about deep anxiety, deep depression, deep rejection, but it's expressed in a humorous way in a picture. But because they'll do that, but they won't sit in front of you and say, I'm really lonely. And I feel like no one accepts me for who I am. That's too hard. So they post other things, what other people have to say about it. So listen, that's what we can hear from them. I have a friend who told me about the Just Between You and Me journal, where their kid is not as comfortable in person. She knows that. So they write a journal back and forth to one another so she can listen there. One of the biggest things I'll coach parents and adults to do is say, ask them one-on-one, or I've seen teachers do this actually, put on the board. What's something you wish older adults understood or knew about what it's like to be, fill the blank, a sophomore, 16 years old, your age, or whatever, and let them express what those things are. They're dying for us to listen, but we just have not listened. They're just not sharing in a way that we're used to in the past.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. And I think what you said about, we think we're listening, but we're not, because we're having to change the way we're listening. We're having to maybe be more investigators, and maybe they're not going to speak as directly as past generations. And we need to be listening with kind of all senses, and even what they're posting, we're actually kind of leaning in and hearing what they're saying through that, understanding there's probably a lot of emotion behind that, and they just don't know how to verbalize it. And so that's the other thing I think is interesting, as they are more digital, they actually are sometimes less verbal, right? And so
Yes.
they're going to communicate in that digital form as their first language, as opposed to that verbal form, which is maybe what we're more used to. So that's insightful and helpful, I think, as we are looking at this idea of even how do we make faith more attractive? Because right now, a lot of them are not seeing it as attractive, and therefore they're leaving. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, as as you're thinking about that, does anything else come to mind as far as even how you're flipping, how you're doing camps or club, or just how you're reaching kids in innovative ways?
Yeah. So one of the things we've learned a little bit more is how do we enter the digital space if that's the space kids are in. And before the pandemic, it was 4 to 6 hours a day in the digital space. And then 69% of Gen Z reported spending more time since then when the pandemic started. So more than 4 to 6 hours a day in a digital space. And we're like, well, that's where kids are. Maybe that's where we should be too. So I'm experimenting, right? Like I'm trying to understand, and the high school kids get a big kick out of this 42-year-old mom trying to figure out TikTok together, but that's what we do. We will play together in the way that they're comfortable with. So we play in TikTok. We do some online, like Among Us. We do some games that are online, just that's comfortable where kids are. The other thing I'm doing is really paying attention to what are the big questions they're asking, and how do we address those in a space where we're sharing the gospel? So how does God feel about racism and sexism? And how do we look at Jesus as an example of what God says about these things? What about what about safety? Can we understand that everything about the faith life feels like up on the surface is contradictory to the value of always being safe? So because, look at the Bible, you got people getting their heads cut off and thrown in a fire and thrown in the jail and all sorts of things happening, except that we've got to now figure out, we got to redefine this now. Safety is not that nothing's going to happen to you, right? Safety is knowing that you are fully known, fully accepted, and fully loved by God, and we follow him. You actually never have to worry about what anyone says about you, who people say about your identity, whether or not they're going to accept you, whether or not you deserve dignity or fight for the dignity of others, because now that's all going to come through Jesus. So there's lots of little places in our kids' lives today where we look at like something like FOMO, which used to be a joke. Do you remember it was a joke? Like,
Oh yeah.
FOMO. And now it's like a real psychological dynamic that's being studied, and more specifically for this generation, because they're being told all the time through the digital space and through marketers, you are always doing the wrong thing with your time, and there's always something better you can be doing. Well, that fights against the exact practice of being present where you are and fully in that moment, right? So when we talk about following even Jesus, what does Jesus have to say about being present? What's the gift that God gives us about being fully present and not worrying about what's coming, or feeling shame about what's behind you? So there's gifts and stuff we give in our discipleship that can help really kids go to those places. So we talk about those specific places. We're finding that in our own language, we have to unpack terms. So here's an example. We were talking about how to distinguish the Lord's voice in your life versus the other voices. And as we're talking, I thought I had this great Bible study, we're talking through. And what do you guys think? And a girl raises her hand and she goes, I don't actually hear voices in my head. And it was this, oh yeah, I'm not talking about voices. So we had to go, okay, what is it? Sources of thought. What are the sources of thought for there? We're realizing we have to explain what forgiveness, how do you forgive someone? What are the action steps you do with your mind and your heart to move through that? So we're just breaking things down into bite-sized pieces. I would say one of the gifts this generation has given me is they're pushing me to go back into my church history and my theology, because they're like, why do you believe that? Why do we believe this? Is all theology post, this colonial Western Europe, thought? You're like, actually, no. There's like 1,500 years before the people writing in Christianity. So I was in these places. We're really just paying attention to how do we break this down and then give them a really, really, really good foundation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just went through that with my daughter. She was trying to make a big decision, and it was that FOMO piece. It was, what if I do this and I miss out on this? And then, but what if I don't do this and then I miss out on that? And it's real. It really is real. And for us to, instead of maybe minimizing how they're feeling about that, really entering into that space with them and helping them play situations out. And like you said, and then encouraging them to whatever decision they make or wherever they go, to lean in to that decision or that place and be present in it. So great word on that, Tanita. Well, as we're finishing up today, do you have an experience or just something you could share that really kind of encapsulates this generation?
I have a couple letters. I mentioned before that I had some friends who were teachers that tried this kind of exercise of, what do you wish adults understood about you? And I have a couple letters, and I think they do a really good job of verbalizing how they're feeling. And I think even helping us understand how can we lean in, like what are kids saying right now? So here's one. It says, "Dear adults, I really wish you were just more careful about how you treat us. Yes, I'm young and dumb, but that doesn't make me any less capable. In fact, know that I'm stressed out too. I'm working 24/7 as well as personal relationships slowly falling apart. As I try more and more to cope with what's going on, I'm sleep deprived, and my only happiness comes from temporary fixes, only for it to bite me later on. Stop writing us off as lazy and freaking help us. Children right now are going through hell right now, and some adults refuse to listen." And there's a few things I like about that letter. One is that you hear this crazy high self-awareness, right? Krista, what do you hear in that letter?
Yeah, I mean, it brought me to tears actually. Because it's like you're saying I'm lazy, but actually look at all that I'm doing and look at all that I'm juggling and look at all kind of this weight that I'm bearing and I need help. That kind of that whole thing of like, come alongside of me. Don't condemn me for not doing it in the way that you want me to, but come alongside of me and equip me and help me and share the load with me. That's what I heard.
Right. I think you caught the invitation in there, right? It's saying, don't stay away from me. Please help us. Come with me. And I love that. And the second one says, "Dear adults, I wish I could tell you everything that's happens to me, everything I do and want to do, but you always see me in a bad way and scold me. I wish you would just listen." Krista, what do you hear in that one?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hear someone who doesn't feel known or seen, who feels like people are just talking, not listening.
Yeah, and I think that's where most of our breakdown comes from as parents and adults with this next generation. So if there's any little quick tools and tips that I would give, and that I've heard from other parents who like, "Hey, this was really great for me and my kid." One is to just apologize. Like, "I'm so sorry. I thought I had been listening to you and that you weren't sharing with me. But tell me this, do you think I'm listening to you?" And let your kid share. Um, and just understanding that we have got to listen from their perspective of what's going on. The second piece is, and I hear this from kids a lot, is they're scared of sharing because they're scared of being scolded or being talked down to, um, or corrected in a way that doesn't really honor who they are or the values they bring to the table. So I think we have to slow down even a couple bit more before we give advice or correct and go, "Hold on, can you just, I want to understand. I know I'm not you. My experience is not like yours. You're navigating things I've never navigated before. Please tell me again one more time." So instead of like, "I was 15 and I did it," which is my number one response, right? "I did it when I was your age, you'll be fine." To help them move back and go, "Okay, let me just recognize your experience is different than mine. Please help me understand one more time." The weirdest one, I think, for most of us is Kara Powell from the Fuller Youth Institute says, "A question you can ask your kid probably every day is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how's your mental health?" And the reason that's so like funny and can be translated funny ways, I think for us when we were growing up, the question might have been, "How's your heart?" You're not really asking about my physical heart, right? How's your heart? It's kind of an overall, like, how's your well-being? How are you doing mentally and emotionally and all these things? How's your mental health for Gen Z, we say, is actually more a holistic question for them. So we say, scale 1 to 10, how's your mental health? They will answer with a holistic answer. And so that is for them how's your heart was for previous generations. And I just say the most work I do right now is I pray a lot and go, "Lord, if every person bears the image of God, that means every generation reflects something about the kingdom of God. Help me see those things so I can call on those and draw them out. Help them understand how they're uniquely made, that they're not supposed to be everything to everyone. They're not supposed to be me, right? We don't want my kids to be me. They're supposed to be them. So how do I call out how the Lord has designed them to be, how they're supposed to reflect the image of God, and let go of what I think the right answer is and what I think it's supposed to look like.
Wow. Those are really helpful. Thank you, Tanita. That's just like such a great place for us to close today, because it just equips, I think it equips people, whether it is a parent or a teacher or a boss or a coach or a young life leader who is working with just this generation, just to be aware of what's happening with them and to have some questions to ask and to really just take that posture of listening. Thank you so much for joining us today. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your insight and your expertise in this area.
It's a joy. I love being with you and with all of you virtually. Thank you for letting me be with you.
Okay, bye, Tanita.
Bye.